This is the single most versatile woodworking tool ever invented, and that's the router and router table combo. They allow you to do a lot of woodworking projects and processes that you just simply aren't able to do before, or not as easy anyway. This is the Craig Precision Router Table. I'm going to show you all the amazing features that are packed into this table, and then I'll show you a trick or two that you may not have seen before using a router table. If you'd like to check out this or any tool that I show in the video today, I'll link those in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier, or in that shop button right here on YouTube. Thank you to Craig for sponsoring this video. All right, assembling this frame is very easy. And the instructions are extremely clear. You should have zero problems. If you can tighten a nut and a bolt, you should be able to assemble this nice and square. Now, when you put this together, one thing you'll notice is there's square holes, not round, but in this case, a round peg does go into a square hole because this bolt actually has a square shoulder on it, so it seats down into that square part, and then also all the bracing also has that square notch in there, so everything locks in. So you only need one wrench. In other words, you don't have to hold the backside on this stuff. Now, I tried to square this up using a regular woodpecker square, but because the blade's so thin, it's just kind of hard to hold. And I thought, wait a minute, I have these positioning squares for just such an occasion, and they work much, much better. So it's very easy. If you don't have a set of these, I'll link them in the description. They're like $20-something, very cheap, and they come in multiple different sizes. But for stuff like this or building cabinets, these are amazing. Now, this comes with 4 standard legs. So basically these screw type legs that you can adjustable height legs with a rubber bottom, but I opted to go with casters that they also have available, 3-inch locking casters, so I can move this thing around the shop. I would recommend that if you don't have a bunch of space and it's not going to be a dedicated setup and you need to move it around. Those casters are going to be awesome. Now, putting the legs on are very simple. There's 4 of these little brackets here that you're going to be able to adjust, and these also slide up and down because they do have a slotted hole in them that's going to allow those to be adjusted to whatever height you may want on your leg. And then from there, you're just going to put those bolts in there and tighten them down. Very simple. And then you also have the caster that's going to thread up through the hole, put a nut on top, tighten it down, it's done. Also, these nuts you'll notice on the backside have what almost looks like teeth or grooves in them, and what that's going to do is just lock everything in place, basically acting like a lock nut. So putting the router into the router plate is very, very simple. The plate itself actually has almost a target looking system. So if you look all the way around, there's lines marked out on all 4 sides in a circle so that you can see exactly where you need to mount your plate to be exactly centered. It's very easy. You're just going to line that up. I taped mine down so it wouldn't move. I found a drill bit that fit that hole just right. And then from there, I just drilled those holes. Now, I did have a piece of plywood behind it to prevent any blowout or anything like that. And I also used the little positioning square here to keep that drill as close to 90 degrees as I can. Now, if you have a drill press, it's probably best to use that. But if you don't, you can just use a corner of something like that. Very simple to just kind of hold it straight as you drill those holes. You ain't building a clock, just make sure it's not really crooked. Should be fine. And then from there, I flipped it over and I used a countersink bit to countersink those holes so that those screws set below the surface of your mounting plate. Now, once that's done, all you gotta do is mount your router. Very simple. Now I gotta attach the table to the frame. It's very simple as well. All the hardware here is included. I did use a screwdriver because I did not want to overdrive this into this top, because you could strip those out if you use a drill or something like that. So I was very cautious about that. Just use a screwdriver. There's several holes all the way around, and you can see the screwdriver literally goes through the frame so you can drive it straight on. Now it's time to drop the router with the router insert plate into the table, and you want to make sure this is perfectly flush. You can use a straight edge like I have here. If you have a 2-foot level, that'll work as well. And just use your feel, just rub across there, make sure everything's nice and flush. You can adjust that with those adjustment screws that you installed earlier. Very, very simple, and then you'll put your screws in. Now what you will see is when you put the screws in, it's going to sink it down a little bit. So I did have to adjust them up on each corner just a smidge, but everything worked out good. Probably the star of the show is this fence. Now there's a few steps to assembling this, which doesn't take that long, but you just follow the directions. And I will say on this entire thing, assembling all this stuff, instructions are extremely well written. Just follow them step by step, you'll be fine. This is one solid piece of extruded aluminum, and you're just basically adding attachments to it and mounting it to the table. Now, one thing I do like, it has almost a T-glide style fence, similar to what table saws, you know, the cabinet style table saws have, like saw stop and things. I like the fact that you have this lockdown. You can slide this thing back and forth, and when you lock it down, it is square. You don't have to worry about it. There is a tension knob on the other end that you just twist, and that locks it in place, keeps any deflection from happening. It's still square, but if you put too much pressure on it, that little knob will keep that from deflecting. To square it up, very simple. You're just taking some type of measuring device. It doesn't matter what it is. I use a square. Measure this end, get it the same on the other end, and then you tighten these 4 bolts that attach it to this rail. Very, very simple and very easy to do. You can also adjust it with a couple of nylon bolts down there, the tilt on it to make sure it's perfectly square to the table. Mine was right out of the box, but you can adjust that should you need to. There's a couple of measuring scales on this. One right here on top of the fence. You apply that, just a self-adhesive back, or you peel the backing off. Just mark center of your fence, which is 3 feet, so about 18 inches, or right at 18 inches, and then you'll put the 0 add there and go out from each end. You will have to snip just a little bit off of each end, just with a pair of 10 snips or something like that. The other scale is right here, but it is friction fit, which will allow you, no matter where you put the fence, you can actually set your 0 wherever you need to. That way you can reference back to that. I like that feature a lot. Before we put this through the paces, let's talk about the features on this, and it is packed with features and some really, really nice ones too. First and foremost, the thing I love most about this router table is the fence. It's much like a table saw fence. It runs in a rail. It's square. When you lock it down, it stays true to this miter slot, which is great. And on this other end, there's a little twist knob that just kind of locks this down to keep it from deflecting because it is such a long fence. But I do love that. They've also thought of everything here. On the fence, they have the storage area for those jointing rods, which I really like. They also have a storage area for the starter pin, so you don't lose that, which is great because that little thing will get lost really quick. I also like that on top and on front are standard T-tracks. So if you have a stop block that runs in a T-track, then it will work on this router table. The adjustment on the fences on either side, there's 2 wing nuts on the back. You loosen those off and you can move this in and out so that you can make room for bits and just dial it in however you want. The fence also includes a micro adjustment. The micro adjustment goes to 0.025 of an inch in either direction, so plus or minus, and you just loosen that off and you turn it so it's a cam action, basically, so to push the fence away from the bit, 0.025 up to that, or you can pull it back towards you. So very, very fine adjustment there when you're trying to dial that just right cut in. Now the tabletop itself surprised me. I was not expecting this to feel this nice. I've never laid hands on any of these Craig router tables like this, so when I pulled it out of the box, that was the first thing that impressed me, how smooth this is. It has a kind of a texture to it, but it's very smooth. It's unique, and I like it. And so it's just a really nice premium feeling table. Now the core is actually MDF, which is fine. It has some bracing underneath to keep anything from warping or twisting over time, depending on your environment and things like that. It's a very, very sturdy table. So like on this, you could actually put a shelf in here, or you could build in, I've seen others build in a cabinet or dust collection underneath. There's a ton of stuff you can do with these. They're very, very versatile. Now moving on down, I thought I would not like these casters. When I put them on, I was second guessing using them. I was like, well, maybe I should just use the regular standard feet because I was worried it wouldn't be sturdy. I was worried it would move. It's not. These casters work very well. I like how when you lock them down with your feet, they stop. And it's very easy to lock them and very easy to unlock them. And once they're unlocked, everything rolls very nice. These are 3-inch casters, plenty big enough for this in a shop setting. So if you're in a small space, or you just move your stuff around in a larger space, I would absolutely get the casters. One thing I noticed while using this router table was the ease of access. First make sure that you mount your router so that your power switch and your variable speed dial, if you have variable speed, is accessible on the front of the router table. I did do that, thankfully, but I have been known to make mistakes like that before. So just make sure that is done. I really like how this DeWalt router works in this router table. Because of how this ring raises and lowers the router, it makes making the adjustments from underneath very easy because you just reach under there and you can just twist that and you can see where your bit is being set at. This router, I think, is probably the perfect router for this router table, and I'm glad I've got this one. Now, let me show you what this thing can do and then show you a few tricks that you can do with a router table. First thing I did was try to joint. I installed those jointing rods in the back, very easy to put in there. It only took me a couple of minutes to get dialed in. Once I got it dialed in, a very nice jointer. If you don't have an edge jointer and you need to edge joint some boards, the router table is a good way to do it. All you gotta do is set this up and then you're off to the races. One of the greatest things about having a router table is how much you can do with one. Like there's endless operations you can do, cutting operations and edge profiles and things like that. One of the things I like most is how easy it is to cut across the grain dados. So like on this one, I was able to just use this standard jig that I made. There's a whole video on this I'll link to after this video. You can use this little jig. It has a handle. It's just plywood, cut square handle. The holes are for extra clamping options. But you can just use this as your miter gauge because it rides against your fence. And remember, if your fence is square like this one, then all you have to do is push through the cut. And it also acts as a sacrificial piece after you go through the cut to prevent blowout. And so you can make a lot of really nice dados at any point across a board like this using that jig and a router table. Or if you have a miter gauge, you can do the same thing with that. Because we have this standard T-slot, I was able to use the Inker miter gauge to be able to cut different slots as well as a wider dado with this 1/4 inch bit. Next, what you can do is easily do rabbets on boards. And what I like here, I use these Craig setup bars. These are my favorite setup bars. I've had these for years, bought them a long time ago. But you can easily set up an 1/8 inch away from the fence and an 1/8 inch high on your bit, and then I cut the rabbet. Well, I decided that wasn't big enough, so I want to do a 1/4 inch. Very easy to do. Take my 1/4 inch setup, 1/4 inch away from the fence, 1/4 inch high, make that cut. I've got a perfect 1/4 by 1/4 rabbet on the edge of this board. Using patterns with a pattern bit or a flush trim bit is one of the best things that a router table can do. I love the router table for this purpose, especially if you have a shape that you want to batch out. Or in this case, I use this edge guide from Craig, which if you want to do like round profiles or chamfer profiles, this thing has several different inserts that you can swap out. And so you can be able to get different size chamfers or different size roundovers or anything like that on the ends of boards. And so right here you see me just using a flush trim bit, just a standard, this is from Bosch, just a Bosch flush trim bit. Very easy to do. It's gonna follow that pattern on this router table and it's gonna come out looking nice every time. You can repeat that over and over and over, and that's what I like about those pattern bits with the router table. Now as far as doing edge profiles like roundovers and chamfers, it's gonna work well because there's a bearing on the top that'll ride on your board, and that's gonna allow it to follow the edge of the board, and you're gonna be able to do those edge profiles very easily. First thing I did was did a fairly good size, I think it's a 3/8 inch roundover on a board. You can see that it really rounded it over. Then I took one of the guitar trays that we make and I was able to put that roundover on the bottom of that very easily. And you can see here that I also tried the chamfer bit on the guitar tray as well as on this standard 1x6 here, and it come out looking really nice. It's just where these shine. If you're doing a lot of edge profiles, you want them all to look extremely even because of the surface it's referencing on. You don't have to worry about your hand router tilting or anything like that. This is going to give you a really nice clean finish. Let's talk about dust collection. I've been impressed with the dust collection on this. I just hooked up my Festool dust extractor to the port in the back using a little adapter. As you can see, when I was making any of the edge stuff against the fence, like jointing or doing the rabbets, you can see that there was almost zero dust coming out of there. It was collecting all that dust, which I really do like. Now, there's only dust that really come out of there is when I was doing those dados or the edge profiles, which is gonna happen. There's really not a lot you can do about that. And then on the floor, there was not a whole lot of dust down there. It was pulling in most of it through the dust port, which I really like. I think they did a really good job here with the dust collection. Now here's a trick you can do on a router table that I don't know that I'd want to do with anything else. If I needed to cut a slot down the center of a board, in this case I'm making a jig, and so I need to be able to put a bolt through there so it can slide up and down. You can use a router table to do that very, very safely and very accurately. First thing you want to do is set up your router table fence, and you want that fence enough distance away so that the bit's going to be in the exact center of your board. Once you do that, then you're going to set up stop blocks on the left and right side of that bit so that you know where the slot will stop. From there, all you have to do is get some double-sided tape. I like this tape here, I'll link to in the description. And then you'll take a piece of scrap, in my case a piece of plywood. All you have to do is put the board against the right stop block, ease it down onto the cut, and then move it all the way to the left until you hit your other stop block. You're going to repeat this process until you get all the way through. I'm taking about 1/8 inch passes here all the way through, and now I have a board that has a slot in it and I can make this jig using a router table that I wouldn't otherwise been able to make with any other tool, not safely and easy like this. On the crosscut jig you saw me use on this router table, it's very, very easy to make. First and foremost, you don't want to try to push that board across that bit without something supporting it, like a miter gauge or this jig. So it's going to be a lot safer. I'm just going to use 3/4 inch plywood here. This is about 12 inches square. You want to try to get it as square as possible. I'm going to use my crosscut sled here to make this jig square. Then from there, diagonally, I'm just going to cut a 3-inch piece of plywood and glue that down across this board. Now you can drill a couple of holes in there for extra clamping. That's what the holes are for, but it's not necessary unless you just want to do that. Once the glue's dry, you've got a crosscut jig that you can use on a router table, and it worked really well on this Craig table. Now, is this a perfect router table? No, nothing's perfect. There's always room for improvement, so I always give my 2 cents on what I think. First and foremost, I really wish they gave us a couple of these red inserts in different sizes, mainly because my roundover bit wouldn't fit in there on some of the other ones. I had to use the really big opening, and I would just prefer if it was a little closer. I'm sure you could buy some different sizes, but I wish they were included. I'm spoiled because I have the Craig Precision Router Lift in my router table, so I can change bits from on top. That's one thing to keep in mind. You'll have to drop the router out to change the bits. It's not a big deal. You just drop it out, set it on top, change the bits, put it back in. But doing it on top, being able to raise and lower everything from the top just has me spoiled on the Craig Precision Router Lift, which has all that controls on top. But I think this is a fantastic option for the price because a router lift, a really nice router lift from any major company, are very expensive. So being able to mount any router into this plate is a fantastic idea. And I'm glad they did that. That way it keeps the cost down so you don't have to also incur the cost of the router lift plus the router table. I don't know what I spent on my router table when I built it, but I guarantee you it was pretty close to this, if not more. After the fence, the router lift, the dust collection parts and pieces, the drawer hinges and slides, and the whole process and the time it took to build, I would have been, I think, probably way ahead if I'd have just got something like this at the time. So I'm glad there's options like this out there. Now, who is this for? Well, I think beginners or people with limited time, or you just want to buy once and be done, not have to worry about taking the time to build a router table. When I built mine, there was a lot that went into it because you have to basically route down into the board to get where the router plate's going to sit. All that has to be exactly right, and that takes time. It also takes time to build something like that, and by the time you incur the cost of the hinges and the drawer slides and the router lift and the fence, it all adds up quickly. Plus the time investment was probably about 2.5, 3 days of building that thing. When I built this one or put it all together, I've probably got about 3 hours, give or take a little bit, setting everything up, bolting everything together and getting it all dialed in. About 3 hours versus 3 days. Plus everything comes in the package, the router lift, the fence, the tabletop, and the stand that you can modularize, build on to yourself with a cabinet and things like that. I think this is a fantastic option for those who just want to be able to get something that's going to be nice and it's going to last them for years and not have to worry about trying to build one themselves, making sure everything's all flush, because this thing was super easy to dial in. I don't know, I'm impressed. If I could make this thing myself, if I could tell them to do something different, this is what I would do. First, include a stop block in there or two. 2 stop blocks would be fantastic. They could be aluminum, very inexpensive, just to have when you get this, because I use stop blocks on my router table often. Now you can use things like these screw clamps. They make really good actual stop blocks, but having one integrated onto the fence would be nice. The other thing I wish that they would include a couple of more of these red inserts at different sizes, because my roundover bit just didn't fit in there. I wish we had one that was in between the big opening and the medium size opening. Other than that, I can't think of a lot I would change about this. It's really good. It's really nice. It's a nice router table. Some local woodworker is going to be very happy. One cool thing is Craig does offer plans on their website. Not a lot of people know that. This stand is one of those where you can, basically there's plans available so you can build a cabinet inside there. They have all the cut lists and all that stuff, so that's pretty cool too. This might be the perfect router table for beginners all the way through advanced users. Seriously impressive. If you like this video, you got to check out the basics of using a router right there. Click on that box, get you the big old virtual fist bump. Or those router jigs I was talking about, there's a whole video right there.